Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts podcast. My name's Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs and try to do these things more responsibly. Today, I am back after a bit of a month break. I needed some time to kind of focus on work and get a little more settled at home before I dove back in, but I am here with another conversation for you, and I'm actually really excited about this one. I thought I lost this conversation amidst my travels, and I found it last week, and so I'm able to share it with you today. So the person I'm having my conversation with was, at the time, my fiance, but now my husband, Ferdi. So I'm really excited to share it with you, and I hope you enjoy it. Ferdi, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. I know a couple of my viewers have been eager for this conversation. So
I know who you are.
Yeah, Luke Thompson.
Most likely the only one.
Yes, pretty much. But anyways, thank you for coming on and having a conversation.
Oh, welcome. Well, thank you for hosting me.
Sure. Why don't you start off by giving us a little background? Who are you? What's important?
Not much. Well, my name is Ferdi. I work in IT.
That's it?
That's it.
What's our relationship?
Our relationship is complicated, as they put it on Facebook.
It's very complicated.
Mm-hmm. Do they still post that on Facebook?
Probably. Now they probably got like polyamory and all of these other things on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't checked, but I assume.
Well, then maybe we need to update our relationship as well.
Well, we are not Facebook official. That's true.
Hurts me.
No, it doesn't. You don't care one bit.
No, not at all. So no, we're engaged.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to get married somewhere this year.
Hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Got a lot of planning to do, but
Yeah, well, just need to get like some fools to marry us, and that's it. And then we're good to go.
yes, we've already been denied by several fools. Oh, sorry, I'm so rude. Got my phone on.
Okay, I'm done.
And anything else you'd like to include about yourself? You want to talk about your history, your background?
Well, how far back do you want to go? Because that can be a long, long story, and we don't have that much. So,
the Reader's Digest version, the Spark Notes version.
well, little boy, grew up in a small village, moved to a bigger town, died a couple times almost, traveled a bit, lived in on a few different continents.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, I met this weird woman on the internet. Now we're sitting here in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Looking forward to marriage. Well, that's the shortest version I can imagine.
It's pretty accurate
Mm-hmm.
for as short versions go. Great. Well, let's get started then. I wanted to talk to you, one, because you're my favorite person to talk to, but also I really think your view of religion and the way that it shapes us and the way that it pursues us is very interesting. And it's definitely changed my view of the way that I look not only at my own religious pursuits, but also the way I look at others and their religious pursuits.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, I'm kind of talking about this idea of the way you believe that religion chooses us more than we choose it. So I'll kind of throw it off to you, kind of let you expand on that a little bit, and then see where this goes.
Yeah, so what you're hinting at is the way I came to Christianity in some sense, in that it evolved.
Well, in some sense, but you were talking about this before we even dated, before
Mm-hmm.
you came to Christianity, this idea of the way that you saw spirituality and the pursuing of those things. So I don't think it was really just your journey of coming to Christianity, because it was embodied there before you even could call yourself that.
Yeah, but it made it most clear, most likely. It became most visible. And in a way, with religion, like it's not like it's a decision you make. It's not like you can just be like, okay, I'm this or I'm that.
Well, explain that more, because I think for a lot of people, especially in backgrounds where I grew up, in this evangelical world, we think it is a choice. You know, you say a prayer, you commit to a life, you move towards something. So what do you mean by that? Because I don't think you fully get that understanding of what you mean that it's not a choice.
Well, because there's multiple facets to it. And often we look at it in a binary way, but it's not binary.
Okay.
And I normally then compare it to, maintaining or a garden. Like you have different tasks in it. And one of the things you don't have an influence on is how it's going to grow.
Mm.
You can't choose which seed are exactly going to be perfect on it.
Which ones are going to catch, which ones are going to create a good harvest.
Yeah, and even with all the same plants, it will be still different. So one of the things you can do in a way that you can influence it is, you pay attention to your garden and you try to maintain it, you try to water it, you try to cut the dead weeds off. But then you still need to pay attention to what's really growing. And the things that are really growing beautiful, those are the things that's gonna pull you in. And that's one of the things religion has to do. It has to choose you in that sense. Like the beautiful pieces will attract you towards it and make you work harder and allow you to put time into it pretty much effortlessly. Like you can't even turn away from it. So then you already have the aspect that it also is choosing you.
So put that in the frame of, like, let's ground that a little bit, because we're starting up here at this very sort of high esoteric level, but like ground it a little bit. Why don't you share a little bit about your story and what that meant for you in this coming to find religion?
Yeah, well, for me, it was mainly like I didn't grow up religious in a sense. So or maybe a little bit till 12, but I never really paid attention to it. But then eventually, I started to get attracted to things. And, first I was looking more into psychology, philosophy, like all kind of different streams. And you just move from place to place in a way.
So what would you say is that thing that started attracting you? At what age, and what was it that started getting you into moving in that realm of spirituality? Not necessarily looking at a church, but at these sort of big idea, sort of emotional identification things.
Well, one of the things for me was probably the main start was my fall after my traveling. Like the travel, I was traveling a lot. I was living in different places, and eventually you get to this place where everything comes together. It's like near perfect in a way, but it's not sustainable. And then eventually you fall out of it. And then, what is next? Like suddenly everything you're aiming for, you suddenly complete it, and it is like from what to do now. And then there's this void, and you can't fill it up, and you can't really find a way or like see something that's sustainable and can give that same nourishment that traveling did. And you can't also go back to traveling itself because it wasn't enough in a sense. Like you have seen it, you've done it, and it's like, okay, done. So you start searching, and you're searching in all kind of different sources. And I think the path for me to Christianity started. It's difficult. There's already like all sort of hints even before all that happened in a way, like even in music. But I think it started a bit with some of the writers. Like I loved the book Loris when I read that the first time, and I didn't even link it really to a religion at all. Like it was just like
even though it's a highly religious book in a certain sense.
Yeah,
the narrative is very religious.
But it's the same with the music I used to listen to. Like now I'm like noticing all these things, and there's some obvious, like the title song is called Jacob's Ladder, for example. It's like, but I never knew that. Like I never listened to it in that way.
You didn't know it because you didn't know the stories, or you didn't know it because you just didn't connect it?
Well, I've heard of Jacob's Ladder before all this, but
yeah,
I just didn't connect it at all. So, and in some ways I probably didn't know the story at all yet.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, there's one thing to know it and then to like know it intuitively in your body and see it as something that identifies with you in a sense.
And even now, like, just knowing suddenly like we might be about a cigarette, right? That's like there's still like all these things revealing over time.
Right.
So but that book, that sort of showed like the thing that I needed was like a magic in the world again. Like it suddenly gave me that sense of like I want to look at the world in this way, in this form of story. Like there was something like a mist in that book over the world that made everything sort of more beautiful. It just made it more beautiful.
And did you see that as attainable in the world, or did you see it as a type of fiction?
No, I knew it was attainable because I've already been there before in a way.
From the traveling.
Yeah. So like I knew it was attainable. The only thing is like, how can I have those eyes again?
Well, because for those who don't know Loris, it's very much about this Eastern Orthodox healer, like a mystic healer in a sense. And so he goes through different stages. He's this holy fool where he's kind of homeless and does all these things, yet he heals all these people and he travels around, and then eventually they go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Is that right?
Eventually to Jerusalem.
And so it's this kind of view of it's a modern Russian book from a Russian author, and it's sort of this view of Eastern Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And I think for most people coming from a Western frame, it's very odd, and it's not necessarily what you would think of as sort of Western Christianity and the sort of world that it paints you. And it almost comes across as a little bit, well, not a little bit, very mystic, but almost fiction. If you're kind of in that world of sort of the materialistic frame.
Yeah. But then generally a lot of the fiction is probably more true.
Well, yes, but that's very interesting you got there on your own. Like seeing it from the outside, because it just feels like a lot of people who grew up in more secular worlds, who didn't grow up with that sort of idea of a religion and a supernatural force in the world, could easily default to a more materialistic frame where it's like, okay, this is this fiction world of this mystic and this myth that covers, but it's not reality. Does that make any sense? I'm just so interested where that spark, and maybe it's just like intuitive in you, but
yeah, I think people just read differently, and that's why some people are way more attracted to fantasy stories or fiction, and other people are more towards non-fiction, for example. So some people would read that even from like complete different cultures, and they would have no knowledge about anything of it at all. And so the core of the soul of the book they would get still, and that's what you see with movies often as well. Like you can have a great movie, and children and adults can watch it. They will see something completely different, but they both catch the soul of the movie if it's a good movie.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know. I just found it beautiful. That was really it. and there was no connection to religion yet, in a sense.
Right.
Like it was just this book, and there was just like this sense of like, okay.
There was something in the essence of the story that like you wanted to see the world in this different way.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's very interesting because I've read Loris. You told me to read Loris.
Mm-hmm.
And I was already becoming Eastern Orthodox when I read it. And I did enjoy the book quite a lot. But there was something about it that from the frame that I came, which was more sort of Western, still more religious than you, but Western. There was something about it that was sort of, it felt like an oddity. And not something I would necessarily read and be like, that's how I want my life to be.
Well, I would not say I want to be like the main character, but...
Well, I didn't think that, but it's something that belief in the mystic in the way, and this belief in like the pattern and the mystery of the way the world is. It wasn't really what I had seen valued in the cultures and societies and groups I had been a part of. So it's always just so fascinating to me how attuned you are to it And like you were so attuned to beauty in this way that I didn't get for a long time.
Well, I didn't conceptually knew a lot about it, to be honest. I probably still don't, but
Yeah. Well, no, I know that, but there's something very intuitive in you that naturally flowed towards beauty, and not in this sort of superficial way where it's like all about the image, but the sense of like the beautiful and cultivating a beautiful life and living beautifully that I don't think comes as naturally to people as it does you. It certainly didn't come as naturally to me. I'll say that.
Well, there's probably different decorations in it. Like, I think children have it probably even more natural than most of us.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they just get drawn to things, and they will pick their interest, right?
Yeah, they can't help it. It's so instinctual for them. But, like, I feel like a lot of us, especially in a modern frame, we lose that as we grow older. But there's something in you that never, it didn't seem to lose that, or at least lose that sense of that being important.
Yeah, and it might have been part of my story, right? Like, I got close to death when I was 12. And I remember that was quite life-changing because, suddenly you are like you kind of feel like you're on a time clock. Like, you really feel like, I maybe got like another 10 years and that's it. And then one of the things you really want to do is experience. And you can do experiences in big ways, like the traveling. But there's also the experience of when you just walk out the door and the sun is finally shining, to feel it, to see the grass. It's like there's a difference to those things. And oftentimes the only thing we really have to do is stand still for a little bit. It's difficult.
Yeah. Well, more difficult for others. I think for me, I'm always going. I'm always moving. I always want to get to the bottom of things, understand what's true. And I think for me, and we haven't, I guess it's not totally connected to this idea of like religion's choosing you, but there's something about this belief in the beauty ethics that helps you operate in that way that I think for people who don't have that ethic, it's a little more tricky because it's like we have to come to an understanding of what we choose and how to find truth and all these things. Yet you kind of have this belief of religion choosing you and your choice is participation in it. Is that right?
Well, and I would say that I probably was lucky that I always felt the world was good, or God was good, or the universe was good, whatever term I used whenever my timeline in a way.
And why do you think you felt that way?
Because it's true.
Well, that's a lot of people going to hear that and say it's begging the question.
Well,
It's true because you feel it?
Because I see it. Because it proves itself over and over. No.
I won't press you too hard on that, but there's going to be a lot of people that challenge that because, I think we do see there's a lot of bad experience in the world. There's things, you almost came to death, 3 times in your life?
Yeah, but none of them was bad. One opened me up to the world in a way.
Yeah.
And another one, which was probably not a physical death then in a sense, but more like a mental death or a spiritual death, that opened up a peace, I would say.
Yeah. Well, it's hard because I agree with you. I do think the world at its core is good and God is good at its core. Yet I've had my own experiences in a way where I've overcome them and seen the good out of them. Yet I also am very sympathetic to that feeling or that instinct that it isn't good. I think especially when you face trauma of certain types, it's hard to wrap your mind around that and orient yourself to the good in that, and it becomes very, because you've tasted the other side of what good is. in a very impactful way, and often not always good. Like there's a lot of negative patterns and negative associations that come with all of those things. But yeah, it's hard because I do also agree there's good. I just wonder what it was about you specifically that kept you oriented to the good in it.
Just because I had faith in it, really. Like that's really all there was to it.
Do you think that was your choice to have faith in it? Or do you think that was something given to you?
Ooh. No, it's probably given in a certain way because it has to prove itself enough. Like faith is kind of like knowing that it will continue to do so in the future. So it has to be proven to me more than enough times that I feel or have faith that it's gonna continue to do so. And then in some sense, I also needed to learn to accept it. So it's both sides again, in a way.
Mm. Well, we'll keep going. So you traveled. You had sort of this existential crisis coming out of it, in a sense, where you didn't know where to go, how to get that magic back, and you started gaining a spark from that from literature and the way that it told stories and showed you this path to something that could be cloaked in mystery.
Yeah. So and then I got interested, of course, in the Russian writers because of the first Russian writer, in a sense. So then you pick up Dostoevsky, and there's one place with Ivan basically eventually saying like the Bible is the only book that is deemed worthless to read for scholars. And that hit me pretty hard because I was like, I'm reading all these books, but that's one of the books I didn't even put on my table or possible to read in a way. So then that was like a little nudge to at least start reading it at one point. Didn't mean that I was going to read it instantly. When, it's like one of those little drops that later on, I can still remember reading that scene, like that's not scene, but that little part.
Right. It's just, it like imprinted on you in a sense. Like it became this little seed in and of itself that like planted this idea of, the biblical narrative. At that point, did you think there was an importance to it, or? Because that comment itself kind of is diminishing too.
Yeah, no. In a part, it was important because there was always a sense that I would eventually have to delve into it in the different religions in a way. But it was never high enough on my attention list to really put attention to it. So this was at least one of those things that it was like from kind of like a snap to reality. Like it's weird that we think only fools would read it, and that if you're a scholar you should not read it. It's like, wait, what?
And because did you have the sense of how impactful the Bible had been in culture and how long it lasted, and that's why it did? No. So what was it that kind of made you think maybe I'm the fool to think only fools read it? Was it something delved into the narrative within that book itself?
No, I think it's probably just growing up in Europe in a sense. It's like Christianity or other religions in a similar way are put away as something of like a century ago. It's like we're done with it. We're like over it. We were like further along. And this was kind of like a stab at that notion of we can be better than how we did it with the Bible in a sense.
Yeah, the thing that came before.
Yeah.
Like you've made progress past it. Why hold to this antiquated thing? And that comment there just sort of made you like it kind of held a mirror to yourself. Is that how you would say it?
Yeah, probably.
So you kind of started being skeptical of your own skepticism in a sense?
No, it was more like from no, it's like it's really weird that we're thinking this one book should be the book that we should not read in a way if you want to be an intellectual.
Right. That you hadn't really read.
No.
So you'd made that judgment call without taking the step to open the pages.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if I'm really made that judgment call myself yet, but it was just like I really should read this book because, it's been there for centuries and it's been read by most people probably in the world still. So it's like it's weird if I go through all these like classics or books that are highly recommended, but then this is one that I'm not even giving a glance to.
Right, and it may not have been sort of obvious in your mind that you dismissed it, but there was something within the culture you grew up in that default was to dismiss it, and seeing that and kind of going, well, why should I?
Yeah, well, and then you kind of like to be the rebel at times as well. So if everybody is like, you should not read that, it's like,
You're such a soft-spoken rebel. What you're gonna do is your rebellious act is read the Bible.
Yeah, it's like, well, of course.
Okay, so those seeds start getting planted in your head.
Yeah.
And so from that point, where did you get to the place where you decided to start reading it?
Well, I was also like discussing things on like psychology and many of those like test places like MBTI and stuff like that. And then one person posted a video about Jordan Peterson. Mm-hmm. So then I was like watching that, and it was like about this dragon story in a way. And I just got hooked to that. Like it's showing like a little extra layer of a story. So then I just watched like his Maps of Meaning lectures, and then his biblical lectures, and you just get to a different view of what stories are, and the multiplicity of truthfulness in those stories.
So let's talk about Jordan Peterson for a little bit, because there's a certain perception of him, especially nowadays after 2016, when he became sort of more popular in the political sphere. And so a lot of people see him as some sort of political advocate or political pundit that is talking about these controversial issues, but that's not really Jordan Peterson you saw.
No.
How did you see him? What do you see Jordan Peterson as? Because I think, for a lot of people, I mean, and I wouldn't say I'm a huge Jordan Peterson fan. I'm very grateful for what he's done for a lot of people like you and others who have turned their lives from something that was going down sort of a negative path to something more positive. But I don't think I quite even understand fully what he is. But explain what you saw him as and what you think he's doing with these stories and these lectures that most people don't know he has.
To me, it was mainly opening up the stories to multiple levels of reality. Like he was suddenly showing a frame in which how to say that. Like the stories come alive at from detailed level to a very high over level, and the higher over level gets connected to different stories over different time zones or like different generations, different location cultures, and then it's so the detailed stories suddenly become this grander tale that's playing at the same time with all these multiple stories below it. And I think he started opening those doors in a way to explore it further and further. And then his biblical stories also, like, especially like he just went through the Genesis, and it's short stories in a way. And if you just do the details, there's not much to it. But then, every little detail matters so much, and then it opens up. And then suddenly one sentence is a story by itself.
Mm.
And that story is told in multiple other stories throughout generations. And then things click more, and it gets more sustenance to it.
Mm. And then you realize these short stories have this place in this grander narrative that are all interlinking and interweaving. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it just it keeps expanding, and it not only shows something about this world that this narrative has created and wove together, but it starts to read you in a certain sense, where now you're seeing yourself in the stories and the way that they play and the patterns that lie within our own worlds. It's very interesting. I mean, I still haven't listened to a Jordan Peterson biblical lecture, so I don't know how I would take it or if I'd like it, but I do. I have an interest in the biblical narrative, and I came to that through church. So it's very different. And I think I've been on a huge journey of the way that I read the Bible and how I've seen it from what I grew up with, which was more of a modern literalist, and not fully literalist, like fundamentalist, 7-day creationist model, although there were pieces of that for sure in different places that I explored that. But yeah, just more of kind of a guidebook and a rule book of what to do and how to live our lives, instead of recognizing the immense amount of narrative that weaves in and the immense respect Jesus had for these Old Testament stories and the patterns and the laws. I don't know. It's very interesting. But I mean, it's hard too, because Jordan Peterson, at least as far as we know now, does not identify himself as a Christian. Yet there was this pull for him that pushed people towards it, even though he couldn't claim it for himself. How did that shape you, starting from a place where you didn't grasp and identify religion as something you could claim yourself?
Well, for me, it was very understandable. Because, well, first of all, what does it even mean, right? Like, even nowadays, like, some people would not call me a Christian in a sense, and other people called me Christian before I would call myself a Christian.
Right.
So, and so there's already that concept, right? That's one of the things we also talked about in regards to Jordan Peterson, was to clean your room. Like, it's not just a few words, and it's not really have anything to do with your room in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it's with all those stories like he gave before that fuse those few words into like a little gateway to remind you of those stories.
Mm.
It's about the slaying of the little dragon next to you first, right, in a way.
So it becomes like a symbolic act to remember this thing, this character that's embodied in what he sees are some of the best stories, to then go and repeat those patterns in your own life.
Yeah, and in some ways, often wisdom is the same case. It's experience. It's things being given to you in multiple forms and multiple times. That eventually there's one thing, and that it instantly triggers all that wisdom to come back to your attention. And then it's like you can use that in a way to do it better this time than if you didn't have all that wisdom with you. And sometimes you just need to be reminded of it. And you always have like different trigger words for people with different modes or places where suddenly they are like snap back into it.
Right. Language is so funny that way. It has this way of enchanting us, but not everybody is enchanted and pulled in by the same word.
No, and it's like the same with music. If you listen to a certain song in a certain place for a long time, and you listen to it 10 years later, you instantly back to that place often.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can still smell the streets.
Yeah, you remember, my dad does that all the time. Whenever he talks about, he knows the years of songs, because he's like, well, that was when I graduated high school, and all of this stuff. He's pulled back to them through the experiences and the what they invoked in him. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
So, okay, we're at Jordan Peterson. He obviously struck something in you. From there, was it immediately this place of, okay, hey, I'm going to Christianity, or
No.
how did it kind of unfold from there?
Like at first, it was just more like, you know, you want to go more into stories in a way, and myths and legends, and you know, you kind of want to go back into all the things that you've read or seen before. And then, well, eventually probably this babbling pastor came along commenting on Jordan Peterson, and I didn't like that video at all, so I probably clicked it away in a few minutes.
Oh, Paul's going to be so sad. No, he actually wouldn't care, I don't think.
Like he knows. He got his YouTube stats anyway, so. No, but then he had a conversation with somebody. I'm not sure which one was the first one, but I just love stories of people, and that's probably one of the things I always loved with traveling as well. It's like, you know, going into the small village, and there, you know, you get to know some people, and you know, you get their stories a bit, and you can get a glimpse of them. And those conversations were like open, transparent, like people really laid things out, and there were some of them who have like things to say that hit you exactly at the spot where you are.
Yeah.
And it just opens up all these new information in a way that's digestible because they already have done something with it, or they are aiming to do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, you know, you start to learn a bit more about it, but not like a lot in a way. And then Jonathan Peugeot came along, and Vervaeke came along, and all those things were starting to mix together.
Well, it's interesting because all three of those people are very different in their style and in their approach to what it is with this meaning crisis, right? This idea of trying to find meaning, trying to find purpose. You know, Paul's this Christian Reformed minister from this iconoclastic tradition. Jonathan Peugeot is super traditional Orthodox icon carver, very into symbolism and patterns. And then you've got Vervaeke, who is sort of trying to, I don't know, find meaning without religion in a certain sense. Am I wrong in that? Again, Vervaeke's not one. Well, yeah, Paul's the only one I watch a ton, but
yeah, I don't follow him closely enough anymore to be able to say that. Like generally, you know, he already uses different words with it, so there's like a sense of like there's a part of it that needs to be there, and then there's a part that he would kind of want to scaff off, probably.
Well, from my understanding and what I get, he's not anti-religion necessarily, but he's more into the neuroscience and the finding things outside of it. And from what I know, has had some negative associations with religion and participation with that. So there's that. So there's this triangle of people that are very different.
Yeah, but they have a big core that's the same.
Mm-hmm.
Because they all go. How to say that? They extract wisdom from close to similar places in a way.
Mm.
Like you can, like for Paul for me was the conversations were the most interesting.
Yeah.
Like that just draw me. But that's like extraction of people's life and their experiences and their stories, and it's like, you know, it's experience information that's been given to you in a way.
Experienced information.
Yeah, and then you have Jonathan Peugeot with like a lot of the icon and the Christianity behind it and those stories. You bring that to the table, and it's also like that already experienced and already developed wisdom that he brings back on the table. And then you have Vervaeke, and he goes back to the philosophers and the intellectuals, and also Christianity and Buddhism and all those places where a lot of wisdom is cultivated, and he brings that into like a package. So it's and it's reasonable that they can easily talk to each other in a way because they do have a similar framework and an appreciation of all the wisdom that has come before them.
Well, and I think there's something within all three of those that are open to exploration.
Yeah.
Where they want to work around, explore ideas. They don't want to shut people down with those things. And so it opens this door for things to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. And for me, when I heard Paul the first time, I was hooked. I wasn't like, who's this rambling pastor? I don't like this. It was like immediately, and it has to do with my background, I'm sure, and the place that I came from coming into this world. But those sort of things, like even Jonathan Pichot, even being Eastern Orthodox now, he's still not, it still hasn't hit my salience landscape in the way it hit for others like you. Not that I don't find him uninteresting. I actually think it's very interesting, but I much prefer his conversations and the way he explores things than, say, his symbolism videos on their face.
I kind of feel that's with all three of them. Okay.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, it's just interesting. So okay, let's get back on course. We've gotten in this mix of this weird corner that we find ourselves in. Pichot, Peterson, Paul, Vervaeke. You're in this little mess and you enter the estuary.
Yeah. So then the Discord came on. I probably was there like the second day. And, you start talking to people and, all those things were coming together and more people were getting involved. And I think one of the big changes that we had on the Discord was at that point that we just had these random people, of course, talking to each other. But also that we were like, at one point, we're all like, okay, let's start using our real names. Like, let's not hide behind this internet, like nicknaming. And that was a big turning point for me, I feel like. That was also, I think, the moment I changed my name also to my real name on the Discord. But it's like, it's showing that, it showed the aim of the Discord in a way. Like, sure, there was like, first, I think the aim was like to get like meetups going in real life. But with that, you're wanting to have people being themselves in there and being able to open themselves up to others. There's no masquerading or there's no, seeing who can be the furthest. Like it's like it evolves around.
Like vulnerability?
No, more like honesty.
Authenticity?
Yeah, honest exploration with each other and open expression in that sense. And then not just at the expression itself, but the exploring and then eventually acting things out, right? Because we also then suddenly see people bringing their life outside of the internet into the community. And then eventually, people meeting each other, like in real life. And so I think it's those things. It's the honest expression. It's earnest inquiry into each other, but in yourself. And then it's acting it out or trying to act it out truthfully. That really gets it. And then it's like you have that openness to each other, which allows people to misuse words, or that allows people to be somewhere else in their journey without instantly being told they are wrong, or they have to hurry up, or it's like allowing them the space to move. And then instead of trying to impose your ways on them, it's like instead of like seeing what they are doing on their ways that might still be imposed on you.
Well, it seemed like the early vibe of the Discord was very grounded in that reality and the recognition of, hey, we're all on this journey. We're trying to figure out what's at the top of this mountain. And we've all taken different paths and we've gone different ways and we've met different people. And now we're here and we're trading notes and we're hearing stories and we're getting that sense of what it is to be a traveler and and find those things. And so it wasn't so cultivated on one side or the other of ideas, where all of these people were trying to figure out, how do I understand? Are my ideas true? Are my ideas good? Are they beautiful? And coming together to try to connect with other people in an honest, grounded way, where it wasn't hiding behind avatars or false confidences. It's like, no, like, this is my name. This is how I am. This is my story. And I mean, clearly we made a connection, but there's been other people who have made a connection. And outside of that, we've met so many people in real life. Outside of that, some good, some bad. But there's been something about that I don't know, it taught me a little bit more about the reality. But it also taught me something too about escaping the internet to create this type of reality that we can learn to cultivate on online spaces in a different way, like, and let that flow into your real life.
Yeah, you have to balance it eventually. Like one of the dangers, of course, with internet in that sense is like you can easily replace your need for certain things. Not sustainable for a long term, but as long as you keep going on it, you will get your hit. So, it's easy to talk about things. Like one of the things we probably were having the most difficulty in the beginning of the Discord was that we talked too often as a king. As if we would be able to eventually set the pieces on the chessboard. Instead of realizing, I'm just one of the
pawns.
Yeah, I'm one of the pawns, and it's like from, what can I do? What should I be doing? That's probably even better the question.
Yeah, where's my role? Where's my niche? And how do I help move forward the game?
Yeah, and it's fun sometimes, right, to talk like a king. Like, you to discuss about it from a high overview and be like, we have to do this and we have to do that. But then it's like from, check your local newspaper, see what's in there, see like what you might be able to do, like, volunteer at your football club here in the Netherlands, for example. It's like in those things, those are the place where you can really make a difference.
Right. Well, we don't have a ton more time. We should have not made the reservation so soon, but dinner is calling. But I wanna keep going because I think this is kind of interesting, and I'll try to pivot back to where we started. Where in your story do you think Christianity chose you, and how did that look like?
Where it chose me was that it was constantly prevalent that I wanted to give more attention to it.
Can you repeat that?
That it chose me by making it prevalent to me that I wanted to put my attention to it. Like I could not turn my face away from it in a sense.
Right, it called you, it pulled you.
Yeah, like I was too interested in the stories. I was too interested in the stories of the people in it in a way.
And do you think that was a slow pull towards that, where all of a sudden you realized you couldn't pull away, or was there something that like flipped it?
No, that was a slow pull. And I would say that's been probably 6-7 years. And I could probably extend it even like longer, to be honest.
Your whole life probably slow move to that. Sure. But, so what is the thing I think that pulled you the most? Was it the people's stories, or was it the biblical stories? Like people who lived Christian lives, their stories, the way they saw those things? Or was it something within the tradition of Christianity?
Probably more in the tradition in some sense. Because in another way, the view I had of the people itself often would have been more negating it almost.
Sure.
So it's somewhere where everything touches each other. And then you see those stories happening in some people in some certain areas, and then you're like, okay, it's proving itself, and it's keep doing that over and over, and those stories then in the Bible keep showing themselves in other forms in your life or in your history or like your past. It's like, and then it's proving itself over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly something hits you again, and you get like a new perspective on one of the stories, and it opens up a couple more doors. And I just love exploring.
Yes.
So and the doors keep opening up. Like the Lord of Spirits podcast has been like a great contribution in that sense, because they just bring so much soul to the details in the stories,
Mm-hmm.
in which suddenly the stories expand further and further.
The categories drop, and all of a sudden, you have more room than you ever thought you could.
Yeah, and then even other things, right? Like nothing directly related to religion in some sense, or Christianity. Like those things also start connecting to it somehow.
Right. They get this deeper color, and then all of a sudden you see the place they have in the bigger picture.
Yeah. So I was drawn in at exploring and then like learning more about tidbits and new ways how it can be seen, and how I could see the world through those things. And then you just keep going.
Was there ever a part of you that was pulled to other types of religion? These other forms?
Before it, I've also like read like some of the Hinduism texts, like just all mild interest, like this the same with psychology, philosophy, any other sort of explorative nature of text in a way. Like I would not say I've been heavily invested in any of those. But.
And you just think it wasn't something that grabbed you. It didn't choose you in the same way Christianity did.
No, it never hold my attention long enough.
Right, so here's the question I think that's important, and especially as we're talking about these paths to explore religion and trying to find a true one, right? Because that's what we're afraid of. We're always afraid of choosing the wrong thing. Or for a lot of people, not everybody.
Yeah,
I know you don't, but for a lot of people in this space, people who've deconstructed, there's this fear, and I talked about it in my conversation with Jess, but this fear of being bullshitted, right? And so where is that place where if religion chooses you, what place do you think you had in the choice of following that? Do you think that there's this potential that you're accepting something that chose you that isn't the thing you should be pursuing, and how would someone know that?
Well, one of the things is you kind of have to go along in some sense, right?
Sure.
With the traveling, for example, you can say that was my God at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's that exploration of experiences. And it brought me to a very, high mountain, so to speak. But then after years of having attained that, you're at the top of the mountain of traveling, and it's like, well, great, now. But then at the same time, there are higher mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's not so much that the traveling itself wasn't a good pull in, so to speak, but it's like, how do you handle it when it starts not pulling you in anymore?
Mm.
And then you gotta let it die, and you gotta move somewhere else, and that's often difficult because then suddenly everything is open and you don't have any frames to work into. Like suddenly you're frameless, so it's an infinity of possibilities.
Mm.
But one of the skills we have as humans is we pick things, or things get our attention.
Mm-hmm.
So, and one of the things you have to do is then, if you get drawn to something again, is pay attention to it.
Mm.
Like enjoy it, of course, have joy with it and explore, but pay attention to the things that you need to cut off.
Yeah, like there's a discerning act in this. So this idea that something pulls towards you, like when we first started talking, you talked often about Jesus and your relationship with him. where you said you're very drawn to him, very attracted to him. There was something about the character of him that was unlike things you had seen before necessarily. Yet you're feeling pulled up towards the top of the mountain as you pursue him, but you don't know whether he is the top.
Yeah.
Do you still have that feeling? I'm assuming not, because now you claim Christianity.
Yeah.
But where do you get that confidence? If that is the feeling that will be the ultimate peak.
Well, I think one of the things was indeed like I saw him high up, but I didn't know if he was at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, one of the things, if you know it's high up, you can just go, because that's where you want to go. You want to go higher.
Mm-hmm.
So then you keep following it, and you keep doing that over and 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 over. And then, you know, it keeps proving it yourself. And then we go back to what I think said earlier was that creates faith.
Mm.
Because it's something that proved itself to you so many times that you
have a trust in it.
Yeah, you trust that it will keep doing so.
Mm-hmm.
And then so eventually, you know, a couple years go by doing that, and then you're like, yeah.
So what does it mean for you now to continue to allow Christianity to choose you? How does it look to continue climbing up the mountain? And where do you come to in this realization of knowing something else might want to try to choose you?
That's fine. Let them try. You know. Now, one of the things is, like, I still have joy with it.
Yeah.
And I still learn so much more, like, every time again. And then there's, like, you know, a limit in my time of attention to it possible, but you see it being incorporated in a lot of other things as well. So one of the things I try to do is just keep, you know, following it. Keep tubing around in the river that's, you know, that I'm in. And then, you know, try to pay attention to the few rocks that might stick out of the water. And hopefully the ones under the water don't bump me too hard.
Yeah. You definitely seem to have more joy in the exploration of these things than a lot of other people. Or at least a contentment of allowing something to pull you in whatever way it's going to flow.
Yeah. Well, and that's maybe thankfully through learning to travel, right? It's like, you never know if the bus really shows up. And that's fine. Because other doors will open. And so it is easy for me to be at peace with it. Because if I get a bump, well, you know, I will then stir other ways a little bit. But I don't have to suddenly get out of the water because I'm too afraid of it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think for me, traveling was a huge impact on the way that I saw the world and the way I started shifting how I pursued religion and the big questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it became much more of like a fight and a race than it did for you.
Mm.
And certainly, I think that has a lot to do with the backgrounds and where we grew up, where I was given a model of truth, told to trust it, and I did. And it certainly got me very far and held up very well in those testing and those striving. But for me, it was sort of like the religious exploration came in like jumping head first, not knowing how deep the water is. Maybe not head first. Jumping in fully and learning how to swim, not knowing if you could, and realizing, you know, the path to get there was easier and more attainable than I thought. And the recognition of testing the waters and taking the leap even when I was scared opened the door to further growth and further opening to what the world really was versus the ideas that I had been given.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of interesting how it created this more ability to pull and be flowed in you, where in me it created more of this felt need to fight and explore and be sure I was on the right path. And some of that came in exploring the wrong ones, but there was this, I don't know, you had this more carefree view of it, where I took it with a high level of seriousness. And it's interesting that the travel was the thing that linked both of those things for us.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like, linked our paths in a certain way.
Well, you see that when you travel, right? There's so many people who travel differently. Like it's kind of insane, and then you can all come together, and somehow it works. I don't know. It's probably also just because I have that peace, right? Like that, sort of that knowing that the world is good. So.
Well, but that's the thing. I knew the world was good too, but I think there was always that fear that I was being bullshitted. Because I had seen it. When I was traveling, I was faced with that view of like, hey, things I had believed and was told were like could never happen or were true weren't. And so then you have to really peel back the layers and see what's left and let the dead wood die. And so I threw myself into the fire. Like I volunteered to go into the crucible to let everything die, and like I felt it, I experienced it. And like there's a beauty to that, but there was also a lot of pain in that. And I'm grateful for it, because now I have so much more peace than I think I ever would have had if I didn't go through it. But yeah, it's these different paths, and there's something wonderful about the joy that you can have with it, where I'm willing to take on the pain of it, and like I'm grateful for the pain of it, because in some ways it's like, well, I can handle it, and like I was willing to like take it on and survive it. But yeah, there's something I think is very good about your story of where it wasn't this fight. And there was this beauty and this peace in the path, even when you weren't uncertain. And I know for myself and for a lot of people, they don't have that. But I also think there's something about that. It's just your joy for beauty. And like you were the first person to really open me up to the idea of beauty ethics before we even had a word for it or an idea that it was something that people argued to live by, you know? And I think that gives you such an edge. So I guess to close it off, because we do have to go soon, why beauty? And what does that mean? Why chase and look for beauty when it comes to the way you live your life versus truth or goodness or anything else?
Well, first of all, beauty is truth, that's true. And goodness, that's good. And it's not so much just chasing beauty, like you're drawn to it in some ways.
It's almost if chasing beauty is part of the problem. It's the recognition of beauty and the willingness to follow. Yeah,
it's allowing it to shine the way for you. It's allowing it to draw you in, and then you need to be drawn in. Right, that's a very important component to it, and that's where we get back to, for example, the Discord. Right, you need to have that earnest inquiry in things. You have to have that honest expression, and you have to try to act truthfully to those things, because if you do those things, beauty will show itself, and you will find beauty, and you will through beauty. Then you also learn to have appreciation for things, or forgiveness for things, and for yourself, for others. And with those things, you will find not just love for yourself, but also for others. And by having a little bit more love for others or yourself, you open them up to inquire more earnest and express themselves more honestly. And then you keep going in that upward cycle of finding more beauty, having more love, being able to be yourself in more ways, and then it keeps going up.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head of something about the discord of the people who I think we were both most drawn to, and just in general, the people who become the most magnetic were the people who were willing to be human. It wasn't the people who had all the right answers and could tell you everything and, like, you know, had the system all figured out. It was the people who were human.
Yeah, pretty dumb and foolish.
Yeah, the people who were willing to, like, bear it all out and not afraid to share the way they saw it and the reasons why they couldn't believe it otherwise. It wasn't just like everything's fine and flowy. It was people with conviction and beauty and, like, authenticity in a certain sense that I think came from these different paths of people finding their way to exploration. And that's where, I don't know, that's where I think there's this beauty in a certain place in the corner, and I'm afraid it's dying. And I don't really think it's dying, but the light seems farther and farther, where it's like that exploration is that spark, that, like, that thing that moves towards the hope for life and light. And
yeah, one of the problems nowadays more is then you go back into ideas, because eventually you know it's easy to talk about those things, and then you go back to being the king in a way, or trying to talk like a king.
Yeah. So maybe it's cyclical, where it's you get to this place, you crack open and you get to vulnerability and you understand what it's more to be more human, and it gives you new ideas, and all of a sudden you become a king again of trying to implement them, and then it takes that new vulnerability and that crack and that story to open you up and go through the cycle again. But I don't know, it's interesting, and I think your story, and I think we just touched the tip of the iceberg with it all, but there's something interesting in yours where there's a lot of people who come to religion through either a background of it or a strong experience with it. But there was something so natural and authentic and sort of grassroots with the way that you found yourself into this sort of garden of Christianity and your pull towards tending it, and as what I would say as a lifelong Christian, someone who would always have identified themselves. There's something so beautiful to the way you approach it all, and the way it, like, shows the cracks in some of my foundations in the way that and gives me more joy in the participation when I see the way that you see it. It's just so interesting. I don't think it's quite as commonly highlighted as opposed to these really big sort of life-changing stories where it's like, I was a drug addict and I had an experience and now I'm a Christian, or, you know, I was an atheist and I fought against it and now I have all of these arguments of why it is true. There's something so different about the way you lived and came to it and the way you continue to participate in it. But I don't know, it just seems so much more sustainable and real than some others people that I've encountered with it.
Yeah, that's always difficult to say. But one of the things that happens, right, is just you just keep watching what's growing. And then, you know, the things that are dying, you put away. And the things that are growing beautiful, you keep tending to more. And that happened to be Christianity for me. Well, I didn't know that. I just saw plants.
Yeah.
And then suddenly your garden is full of them. You're like, well.
But you watched for a long time.
Yeah.
I remember when we first started dating, you kind of talked about the way you saw Christianity. It's like you're at the dock and you're watching all these people walk on water, but you're not ready to step off of it. I'm like, you have this picture. It's your profile picture on Discord too, of you sitting on the dock. And it always reminds me of that story and the way that you took the time. It wasn't skepticism of seeing that it didn't work for people, but it was this real discerning act of like, hey, I see it, but I want to make sure I'm ready to step off the dock and be a part of that. And I want to see and watch and see how this garden will grow. I don't know, there's something beautiful to it. And I'm grateful I get to experience so closely.
Well, so do I.
I don't know why, but
yeah, nobody knows that.
it's one of the great mysteries. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I will close the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.